September 1st, 1939. World War II began. Nazism and anti-Semitism were already widespread in Germany. By then, several European scientists, many of whom were Jewish, had emigrated to the United States. Physicists around the world, especially those in Germany, were discussing atomic fission and the energy that could be harvested from it. Fearing a German takeover with a bomb, Albert Einstein and Leo Szilard sent a letter to President Roosevelt in August 1939. The famous Einstein-Szilard letter highlighted the importance of the element uranium, calling for watchfulness and possible action by the government. Although initially disregarded, the attack on Pearl Harbor forced Roosevelt to heed the threat of nuclear warfare. On August 13, 1942, the Manhattan Project was founded. Led by J. Robert Oppenheimer, the scientists were aiming to develop an atomic bomb before Nazi Germany. As Germany was surrendering in May 1945, the first atomic bomb had almost been developed. The Trinity test, conducted on July 16, 1945, revealed the first successful detonation of a nuclear weapon. Less than 3 years after the founding of the Manhattan Project, the United States had the world's most powerful weapon in their possession, the atomic bomb. By August, Japan wasn't willing to surrender, rejecting the United States terms at Potsdam. It appeared that the only way the war would end was through an invasion, but at what cost? American and Japanese casualties were already high. The primary political, social, and military objective of the United States in the summer of 1945 was a prompt and absolute surrender from Japan. U.S. leaders wanted to end the war and save as many lives as they could. This meant using every weapon they had, including the atomic bomb. On August 6th, the atomic bomb Little Boy was dropped on Hiroshima. Just 3 days later, Fat Man was deployed on Nagasaki. Japanese Emperor Hirohito offered Japan's surrender a day later, on August 10th. When Allied leaders first used the atomic bomb against Japan in World War II, the war ended, but after its conclusion, an ongoing debate over military strategy and ethical standards in war emerged, focusing the acceptance of weapons on their impact on civilians. Further exaggerated by atomic diplomacy, the atomic bomb resulted in the arms race and subsequent treaties to limit arms. Soon after the bombs were deployed, military officials began to dispute their use. Concern over whether or not Japan would have surrendered without the bombs persisted. Secretary of War Henry Stimson supported the decision to drop them and thought that it was the only way to quickly end the war, which was a view supported by most political leaders. Experience in World War I proved that an armistice could easily be betrayed. A complete Allied victory was only ensured through a bomb that militarily finished Japan. However, other strategists disagreed. Dropping such bombs would set a dangerous precedent by showing that they were acceptable weapons of war. For commanders, the debate surrounding the atomic bomb emphasized war strategy. However, scientists had a moral dilemma. After witnessing the bomb's destruction during the Trinity test, many spoke out against its use by sending letters to military leaders involved in the Manhattan Project. Opposing the lack of communication between themselves and the government, they believed that they should have a choice in whether or not the bomb was used. To Japan, the use of the atomic bomb wasn't a question of morality. It was a declaration of complete American dominance. Terms of surrender declared a U.S. occupation of Japan, which resulted in a new constitution. Its details came courtesy of American influence, the democratized political structure, and an absent military. Tensions between Japan and the United States were exacerbated by an incident known as Lucky Dragon. In 1954, a Japanese fishing crew was exposed to radiation from a thermonuclear experiment. Igniting anti-U.S. sentiment, the conflict launched campaigns against nuclear weapons throughout Japan. A similar situation was unfolding in the U.S. Many citizens wanted the government to find a more diplomatic way to achieve peace. A moral debate taking place was represented through a correspondence between Samuel Cavert and Truman. Cavert, a popular minister, believed that the bombs were indiscriminate destructive forces which set a dangerous precedent for the future and urged Truman to reconsider before using the bombs again. Truman's reply confirmed that he acknowledged that the use of the bombs was disturbing, but not more so than the attack on Pearl Harbor or the murder of prisoners of war. Scientists creating the bomb agreed with the public.
We knew the world would not be the same. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. I suppose we all thought that, one way or another.
Although use of the bomb was debated, its implications for international relations were agreed upon. Execution of the bomb gave a substantial advantage to the United States for global affairs and gave birth to a new form of foreign policy, atomic diplomacy. Using the threat of nuclear weapons to reach diplomatic goals was first used by Truman at the Potsdam Conference, when he promised prompt and utter destruction for Japan if it refused to surrender. The United States' new nuclear monopoly also guaranteed non-military goals to be achievable. Placing countries under its nuclear umbrella allowed it to form alliances with other countries. The Soviet Union's demand for the control of Eastern Europe expedited its construction of weapons. By the end of 1949, it had built its first atomic bomb. World War II had ended in a US-led occupation of Japan, and the Soviet Union wanted to expand its territory. As both countries aimed to extend their influence over post-war Europe, stockpiles of nuclear weapons steadily increased, leading to the start of the Cold War. American leaders wanted to stop the spread of communism in Asia and Europe and use their nuclear umbrella to strengthen ties with other nations. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union was sending its nuclear weapons to other communist states, including Cuba, which widened the conflict. During the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, a quarantine was issued to prevent Soviet missiles from reaching Cuba, and the US ordered all nuclear weapons there to be returned. In the most dangerous case of atomic diplomacy, the Cuban Missile Crisis resulted in a promise by the United States to never invade Cuba without military provocation and to remove nuclear missiles in Turkey and Italy. By the mid-60s, the inefficacy of atomic diplomacy was revealed. Nuclear weapons arsenals in the United States and the Soviet Union had become about equal in size and power. The security of both nations, as well as worldwide peacekeeping, became dependent on a principle known as mutually assured destruction. As both countries became aware that a nuclear strike would result in their complete obliteration, the threat of nuclear weapons during conflicts was diminished. The loss of potential for domination and the loss of US monopoly resulted in the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, which effectively prevented the spread of nuclear weapons and their use on other nations. Since the atomic bomb's effectiveness resided in its capacity to destroy cities' population and facilities, urbanized countries held the most potential for annihilation. The use of a nuclear weapon on another country would bring about a global arms race, a fact known by both the United States and the Soviet Union. A competition to manufacture nuclear weapons would heighten fear and hostility, increasing the probability of war by undermining military stability and straining international relations. Countries such as Britain, France, and China created their own nuclear weapons after the US government permitted the international exchange of information. The limited secrecy about nuclear weapons prevented further surprise attacks from occurring. However, as other countries began developing nuclear weapons, the efficacy of an atomic bomb didn't depend on surprise, only on destruction. Since most countries in Western Europe didn't have their own atomic bomb at the time, their security depended on the United States. With such a high store of nuclear weapons, disarmament and arms control became futile. The Strategic Arms Limitation Talks, which started in 1969, aimed to reduce the United States and Soviet Union's arsenals of nuclear weapons. By reducing the manufacture of missiles and bombers capable of delivering weapons, the talks effectively limited the amount of missile launch sites either country could hold. The atomic bomb's extreme destructive power strengthened ties between the United States and the Soviet Union by reducing their armaments and preventing one country from attacking the other. The accumulation of nuclear weapons in certain countries also brought an opportunity for peace. The strength of an atomic bomb gave it enough potency to start another world war. By guaranteeing the total obliteration of a country if it used its nuclear weapons, the atomic bomb decreased chances of unnecessary attacks on other nations. A high stockpile of weapons, along with the threat of mutually assured destruction, allowed peaceful relations between multiple countries to flourish. Disagreements over the effects of an atomic bomb in war have resulted in a restrained use of weapons which harm civilians. The bomb caused numerous deaths when it was deployed and later chronic illnesses in people exposed to radiation. Its hazardous results created divisions between the government and the public. The uncertainty of just how many American lives were saved had led to continuous discussions over its necessity. The devastating impacts of the bomb led to a reshaping of the code of humanity in wars, with commanders debating the results of weapons on a country's well-being before executing them. Although Japan had surrendered immediately after the bombings, a diminished quality of life for Japanese citizens had resulted, along with environmental consequences and a contaminated food supply. Since the bomb reduced the welfare of most of Japan, Japanese and American leaders weren't on good terms at the end of the war. However, the goal of decreasing nuclear weapons held by other nations, especially the Soviet Union, increased commonality between the two. The atomic bomb, influencing the politics of the Cold War, changed how countries interacted with each other during conflicts. In an effort to preserve peace, leaders began discussing issues and how to fix them rather than instigating invasions or occupations of other countries. The importance of strong leadership became apparent following the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, when arms control became complex and problematic if not restrained. Currently, as countries like Iran are attempting to create their own nuclear weapons, debates over a limit have arisen. As new weapons of mass destruction are created, it is more important than ever for countries to maintain strong relationships and to consider all perspectives before taking action.
I think the only hope for our future safety must lie in a collaboration
based on confidence and good faith with the other peoples of the world.